Hello. Today we're going to talk about the brain and psychology and how they fit together. Your brain regulates everything you do, from movement, vision, your appetite, your heart rate, how you sleep, how you breathe, your hearing, emotions, coordination, how you learn, your memory, just about everything that makes you you. Let's start with an interesting fact. What do you think? The number of nerve cells in the brain exceed A, the number of grains of sand in the sea, B, the number of stars in the Milky Way, C, the number of people on the planet, D, the number of students at OTC. If you answered B, the number of stars in the Milky Way, you're correct. 100 billion nerve cells make up the brain, more or less. Another question. The brain accounts for what percent of our body weight? 2%, 5%, 12%, or 20%? If you said 2%, you're correct. The brain weighs about 3 pounds, or only 2% of the average person's body weight. Pretty small, but pretty powerful. The brain accounts for what percent of our total oxygen consumption? 2%, 5%, 12%, or 20%? If you said 20%, you're correct. Even though the brain is small and only comprises 2% of our body weight, it uses a whopping 20% of our oxygen consumption, the amount of oxygen we use on a moment-by-moment basis. So let's look at the brain a little closer. Just looking at the surface of the brain, it looks all convoluted and wrinkly. In fact, the more wrinkly the brain is, the smarter somebody is. What are those wrinkles? You see a bunch of humps and wrinkles. Those wrinkles are gyri, or gyrus is singular. The grooves in between those bumps and ridges are called sulci, or sulcus for the singular. And then right down the middle of the brain, you see a big groove. That's called the median sulcus. That big groove divides the brain into right and left hemispheres. You heard right brain thinking, left brain thinking. We'll talk a little bit about that. The right and left brain are connected. The nerve tissue that connects the two is called the corpus callosum. So the corpus callosum is a nerve pathway between the right and left hemispheres of the brain. Now the interesting thing about that is there's a difference between men and women in our corpus and callosum. Women have a much thicker corpus callosum with many more nerve cells. It means they have more connections between the right and left brain hemisphere. Men have more connections within the hemisphere. So the connections between different parts of the right hemisphere, front and back, and the same thing on the left. So there is a difference between his brain and her brain. So his brain has connections within the hemisphere. Her brain has connections between the hemisphere. His brain typically is more left dominant. We'll talk about what that means here in a second. Her brain tends to be a little more equal. She uses both right and left brain. His brain has less verbal activity. For instance, if he's reading a novel, he will mainly use his left brain. If she's reading a novel, she will use her right and left brain equally. Our brains, right and left, are specialized for certain things. Our right brain is more specialized for creativity, spatial perception, and definitely recognizing faces. The left brain specializes in more logical thinking, more analytical abilities, and language in most people is confined to the left side of the brain. Another interesting aspect of our brain is that the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body. and vice versa. The left side of the brain controls the right side of the body. So the motor pathways cross from the brain into the body. That's why somebody that has a stroke or trauma on the right side of the brain will have issues with being able to move the left side of their body. Let's stop for a brain scan. The right hemisphere controls A, the ability to speak, B, the right side of the body, C, the ability to recognize faces, or D, the ability to think logically. What do you think? The right hemisphere controls the ability to recognize faces. In fact, the ability to speak is mainly on the left side for most people. The right side of the body is controlled by the left brain, and the ability to think logically typically is in the left side of the brain. Time for another brain scan. True or false? Men have a larger corpus callosum and more nerve tract connections between left and right hemispheres of the brain. If you said false, you're correct. Women have a larger corpus callosum and more connections.